Hello and welcome to Insurance in Canada. I'm your host, Rick Pineda. Thank you so much for joining me. On today's episode, we're looking at three articles. The first article will be looking at the current legal environment and how that's affecting claims in professional liability. Second article will be looking at a report from EU Carmakers saying that the internal combustion engine ban may not be feasible. Will EU lawmakers listen? Will Canadian government listen to what the folks in the EU are trying to do as well? And lastly, we'll be looking at a case in British Columbia of a man who was ticketed for driving without insurance on a vehicle that you might not be able to insure. So without further ado, let's take a look at insurance in the news. Our first article today talks about professional liability insurance. So, for those of you who are not familiar, there's different types of third-party liability insurance: automobile, personal, and your habitational. On the commercial line side, there's various versions. The most common one being commercial general liability. Commercial general liability deals with bodily injury and property damage that's caused by the business action of an individual or a corporation or a company. Professional liability deals with anything that's not involving bodily injury or property damage that can cause a loss to a business's customers. So when we're talking about a lawyer, a mistake that they may make on giving advice to a client and that client loses money on a real estate deal, for instance, there's no bodily injury or property damage that's involved in that particular claim, so commercial general liability would not answer, but that is what professional liability is for. Professional liability, also called errors and omissions insurance, so it covers any errors or any failure to perform by somebody in a professional capacity, lawyers, accountants, architects, even insurance brokers also need errors and omissions insurance because there's actions that we can do, advice we can give to our clients that can cause them financial loss that's not related to bodily injury or property damage. So the article that we looked at today looks at the current environment and how claims are being dealt with regarding professional liability, and are we seeing any increases in payouts when it comes to these types of claims? So, why professional liability claims are rising, but payouts aren't, as Canada's legal environment starts to mirror the US commercial claims departments watching for lawsuits? I'll sue, and they do, but are they winning? When it comes to private sector coverages for professional liability, the answer is generally no, says Oren Shamul, who heads professional lines at HDI Global SC Canada. While a tilt towards US-style litigiousness means total number of claims are increasing in Canada, that's not translating to rising claim severity. We have not experienced increased payouts on claims. We have seen a greater frequency of claims, he tells Canadian underwriters. Shamul, hopefully I'm pronouncing your name correct, as his firm's lawyers are diligent on informing his team about incoming legal action. It's not unheard of in 1 year to have 30, 40, 50 notices on a single law firm. But what we're seeing so far is that most of those go away, or they're settled within the Law Pro lawyer's professional indemnity company, and it doesn't bleed into the excess layers, he says. Law Pro provides primary errors and omissions coverage for Ontario lawyers. While that's good news for now, Shamul says change could be coming. Canadian insurance and legal professionals have long warned that the U.S. brand of litigious behavior is slowly making its way north, and he says mechanisms like litigation funding firms, which provide plaintiffs with financing to bring lawsuits in exchange for a share of the proceeds, are becoming more common in Canada. That's always been an issue when it comes to Canadian businesses trying to uh, operate in or sell their product in the United States, sell the product, sell their services in the U.S., trying to find coverage with their Canadian insurers willing to extend coverage or provide coverage for those companies that do sell or provide services in the United States. It can be challenging depending on what we're talking about. what it is that the Canadian company actually does. But that is because they are very sue happy in the United States. They will sue for anything, any reason, anytime. There's always a lawyer available who's willing to give it a go. It's not as bad in Canada, but yeah, in the United States, it is a much more of a much more bigger of an issue. And like I said, trying to insure those companies that do operate in the States from Canada can be a bit of a challenge. So if we start seeing the environment in the Canadian legal system change to reflect more what they have in the United States, it could cause premiums for liability, commercial liability, to increase, professional liability as well. Back to the article, I do think that we are going to see an increase in severity down the line, he adds, but I couldn't tell you if that's going to be in the next 6 months, 12 months, or 36 months. He adds U.S. private equity firms are getting involved in litigation funding programs. It's starting to happen in Europe, he says. It happened in Australia in years past, and that really did cause a rapid deterioration in insurance company earnings, and Australia has become far more litigious. Another factor is inflation rates, which can increase hourly fees charged by lawyers and other participants and service providers within the legal system. In such a scenario, your lawyer's costs go up, and that causes higher limits erosion. Experts' fees go up. Our outside counsel fees would be going up. All that tends to ride along the same wave, says Shmuel. And then in such a scenario, we're telling our insureds inflation is going up 3 or 4%, and we anticipate that lawyers' fees and our costs are going up 3 or 4%. 3 to 4%, so therefore we need to increase your rates accordingly. That's a losing argument sometimes, so that could lead to you eating costs. So the unintended consequences of inflation, unintended consequences probably of tariffs as well, although you probably won't see that as much impacting lawyers' fees, but inflation definitely. So it's the kind of costs that nobody really thinks about when we're talking about inflation. Most people are focused on the day-to-day goods, daily needs, and it's understandable, but this is also other aspects where high inflation can also affect. When it comes to costs being absorbed by the insurance companies, well, they don't absorb it. Those are passed along in the premiums that they charge, which are, those premiums are paid by the general public. So all these things kind of snowball into increased costs, increased living costs for the general public when they purchase their insurance. Yes, not everybody is going to require professional liability insurance. Not every type of business requires professional liability insurance. But for the premiums are somewhat stable, but as it states in the article, if our system starts to reflect more into what they have in the United States in terms of number of lawsuits that the courts have to address, number of settlements, the huge settlements we've seen down in the United States, yeah, that will eventually reflect in the cost of the insurance companies, into the premiums that the companies pay, and into the cost of their product or services as well. Our next article talks about a warning from EU car makers. The EU is planning to ban internal combustion, new vehicle sales of internal combustion engines sometime in the mid-2030s, and this is a warning put out by car makers in the EU about the feasibility of doing such an action. The Canadian government has also made that decision to ban internal combustion engine sales for new vehicles in 2035. So let's see what the car makers in the EU are warning about. European car makers said the European Union's planned ban on combustion engines is no longer realistic, warning that climate rules risk weakening the region's auto industry and its supplier network. In a letter, leaders of the industry's main lobby groups urged European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen to revisit plans to phase out fossil fuel-powered vehicles by the mid-2030s, arguing China's dominance of the electric vehicle supply chain and the new U.S. trade barriers pose fresh hurdles. Europe's transformation plan for the auto industry must move beyond idealism to acknowledge current industrial and geopolitical realities, European Automobile Manufacturers Association President Ola Kalinius and European Association of Automotive Suppliers President Matthias Zink said in the letter. Meeting CO2 targets for 2030 and 2035 is, in today's world, simply no longer feasible, said Kalinius, who is also the Chief Executive Officer of Mercedes-Benz Group AG, and Zink, a senior executive at Schaeffler AG. The intervention highlights growing tensions between Europe's climate ambitions and economic strains gripping its biggest manufacturing sector. Automakers have rolled out dozens of electric models, but battery-powered vehicles still make up only about 15% of sales, even with uneven adoption across the bloc. In Canada, in 2024, electric vehicles made up 17% of new vehicle sales. And from the reports I've been reading so far, in the first quarter of 2025, we've seen a decrease from the first quarter of 2024. So what they're seeing in Europe in terms of new vehicle sales for battery-powered vehicles is pretty much the same as what we're seeing here in Canada, and I believe in Europe also the first quarter of 2025 saw a decrease from the first quarter of 2024. So it seems that the powers that be are hoping that there's a larger uptake in battery-powered vehicles for new vehicle sales. I believe the Canadian government was hoping that at this time new vehicle sales would be at least 20%, but we have not reached that figure, and I do not know, I don't think we're going to reach that in 2025. You never know. I haven't seen the numbers for the second quarter of 2025. It'll be interesting to see if it follows the same trend as the first quarter of 2025. Back to the article, the intervention highlights car makers continue to generate most of their earnings from combustion engine models, especially high-margin SUVs and premium cars, underscoring the challenge of a rapid pivot. Suppliers are also under pressure, highlighted by companies such as Continental AG cutting jobs and Valeo SC warning on profitability as EV demand cools and financing costs climb, a squeeze that analysts expect will spur more restructuring across the supply chain. EU policymakers have so far defended the 2035 target as essential to meeting climate goals. Environmental groups argue industry warnings are exaggerated, pointing to a steady growth in EV sales and a wave of new European battery projects. The ban was narrowly approved in Brussels after years of debate, with countries including France and the Netherlands already aligning national policies with it. Yeah, that's for the Europeans. Here in Canada, like I said, the federal government wants to adopt that same policy. However, we are a much different country than your average country in Europe. I mean, you can all just might as well just compare us to the entire continent of Europe. I mean, we're bigger than them anyways, never mind any individual country. So to adopt the same policies as the EU when it comes to the ban, it doesn't make any sense for a country the size of Canada, the geography of Canada, the climate of Canada. We've talked about in previous episodes the issues when it comes to insuring electric vehicles, how easily even minor damage can cause an electric vehicle be considered a total loss just because of damage to the battery pack. The tendency for some electric vehicles to spontaneously combust because of deficiencies in the battery pack, and how those types of fires tend to consume the entire vehicle as opposed to internal combustion engine fires where those can be put out rather quickly. Also, the issue when it comes to the expertise to repair electric vehicles. Not every body shop is prepared to work on electric vehicles, never mind repair an electric vehicle. None of those items have really been addressed. Never mind the availability of spare parts for electric vehicles. There's a lot of issues when it comes to insuring electric vehicles. Never mind the issues of trying to adopt 100% electric vehicle new sales in a country where the infrastructure does not exist to deal with the energy needs to recharge all these different vehicles. They don't have that capacity in Europe right now, and I don't see them resolving that by 2035. There is absolutely no way Canada would be able to address that issue in 10 years' time. So, like I said, it's sure the warnings coming out, they are by car manufacturers, so you may see some bias in what they're putting out. Keep in mind, a lot of car manufacturers that were originally going to go all electric, GM, Volvo, I think Jaguar was also planning to go just all electric. All those companies have pulled back from that plan to go all electric just because they've seen what the market is doing when it comes to electric vehicles. And they see which way the wind's blowing, so they can pull back on those plans, but now it's up to the legislatures, the policymakers, both in Europe and Canada, to really have that come to Jesus moment and really analyze whether this policy of going all electric is going to be feasible or not. Let me know your opinion down in the comments. What you think. Is this feasible for Canada or not? What do you think is needed in order to go all electric? Will we ever be able to go all electric, at least in our lifetimes anyways? And our last article today. BC man ticketed for having no insurance on uninsurable vehicle wins retrial. A bit of an interesting article, so I thought I'd bring this to your attention. So the vehicle they're talking about is the one that's pictured in the article. Oh, just trying to remember what's called this type of. It's a one-wheeled vehicle that has the platform for you to stand on either side of the vehicle. It is electric motor that drives the. It's called a one-wheel. So you can see it if you can't see it, if you're just listening to us on an audio podcast. There's one large, it's like a platform where there's one large wheel in the center. You stand on platform on either side of the wheel, and you lean forward or back to make the vehicle advance, back up, and you twist your hips to try and steer it. So you might have seen this on the streets. They're not quite as popular as, say, e-scooters or e-bikes. It's kind of a niche thing. However, there was a man in BC who was ticketed for driving with no insurance for riding one of these vehicles. So let's see what the article has to say. A BC man who was convicted of not having insurance for his one-wheel electric skateboard, even though he can't get it insured, has won a retrial after it emerged that the judicial justice who issued him the fine had been hit by skateboards and was biased. I'd like to know how they found that out. That's some research there. The August 27 BC Supreme Court decision didn't make a ruling on issuing fines for riding a device which you can't get insured, but will give one-wheeled skateboard owner Michael Justin Advincula another kick at the can to argue the law is unfair. According to the decision, Advincula was issued a ticket for riding his one wheel on the road in early 2024. That might be the problem there. I don't think you're supposed to be riding these types of vehicles, if you want to call that a vehicle, on the road. But then again, I'm not sure if these types of vehicles are allowed to be on the sidewalk, depending on where in BC he was riding this. The one wheel is a self-balancing electric skateboard with a single wheel where riders put their feet on either side of the wheel and lean forward to accelerate and backward to slow down. He was fined $568 for operating a motor vehicle on a highway without insurance. However, Admiral Cooler argued it is unfair to be ticketed for this, as it is impossible to get insurance for this type of device. The popularity of electric bikes and scooters has pushed the issue of insurance into the spotlight in recent years. In 2021, Ali Musa Gadban took the issue to BC's highest court, arguing that his electric bike was more of a bicycle than a vehicle, so he didn't need a license. He argued as ICB wouldn't insure it, it must be a bicycle, but the Court of Appeal didn't agree and upheld his conviction for driving without a license and insurance. Advincula has yet to get that far after the officer who gave him the ticket mentioned that the unnamed judicial justice presiding over his case had previously said he'd twice been hit by skateboarders and might be biased. That's an odd thing for the officer to state. Not sure how the officer would even know this, but okay, I guess the officer is helping out the defendant's case. All right. Constable Kim appreciated the close parallels between that matter and the trial that was about to commence. He knew that 6 months earlier the judicial justice had expressed strong views and recused himself on bias grounds, the decision said. Constable Kim raised this potential bias issue with the judicial justice. It was fair and proper that he did so, and the judicial justice indicated that he was prepared to carry on with the trial. So good on you, Constable Kim, for putting your integrity first. So, however, Justice Douglas Thompson found Advincula's trial to be procedurally unfair. I am satisfied there was a miscarriage of justice, the justice said, and ordered a retrial whether Advincula would be able to convince the court next time that he can ride his one wheel on the road without repercussions remains to be seen. So, whether the vehicle has to be insured or not is going to depend on normally it's the Motor Vehicle Act of the individual province or territory in question. Normally it's called a Motor Vehicle Act. It may be called a slightly different thing in your particular province or territory. In BC, it is called the Motor Vehicle Act. Same thing in Ontario. They're obviously different acts. But this is where we're going to find where the definition of a vehicle actually is. And this is the BC Motor Vehicle Act, at least the most recent one, as far as I know. Their definition of a vehicle means a device in, on, or by which a person or thing is or may be transported or drawn on a highway, but does not include a device designed to be moved by human power, a device used exclusively on stationary rails or tracks, mobile equipment, a motor-assisted cycle, or a designated motor device. So it does say a motor-assisted cycle, so I'm kind of bewildered why that other case that was mentioned in the article, the one involving Ali Musa Gadban, who was riding an electric bike, why he was convicted of driving without a license and insurance, considering it's not defined as a vehicle in the Motor Vehicle Act. It does say a motor assisted cycle means a device prescribed as a motor assisted cycle for the purposes of section 182.1. Cycle means anything, either of the following: a device on which a person may ride that meets all the following criteria. Device has wheels and is only capable of being propelled by human power, so that one wheel definitely would not qualify as a cycle. Device, it is not, and it's not similar to a wheelchair, stroller, skateboard, kick scooter, roller skates, inline roller skates, or a sleigh. The device is not designed a designated personal mobility. Or B, a motor-assisted cycle. So the one wheel does not sound like a motor-assisted cycle. It does say device is not similar to a skateboard. However, a skateboard is not motorized, a traditional skateboard. And a skateboard normally has more than one wheel, so I'm not sure if you can consider a one wheel similar to a skateboard. But the motor-assisted cycle does talk about section 182.1. If you go to section 182.1, which is in part 3, if I'm not mistaken. Motor-assisted cycle. The person must not operate a motor-assisted cycle on a highway except in accordance with the regulations. Lieutenant Governor and Council may prescribe a device as a motor-assisted cycle. If the device meets all of the following criteria, a person can ride on the device, so the one wheel you can. The device has wheels and attached pedals or hand cranks that will allow for the cycle to be propelled by human power. One wheel does not have that. It is not a motor-assisted cycle. The device has an attached motor that is a prescribed type, has output not exceeding a prescribed. Yeah, but unfortunately, it doesn't meet the definition of a motor-assisted cycle. Even the e-bike would have to have pedals on it, so if your e-bike does not have pedals on it, it's not considered a motor-assisted cycle. So the one wheel definitely is in a gray area when it comes to the BC Motor Vehicle Act. If it is considered a motor vehicle, it doesn't seem to meet any of the exceptions of not being a motor, or an exceptions of being a definition of a motor vehicle. So it's one of those situations where the legislation has not kept up with the changing environment when it comes to motorized transportation. So it'd be interesting to see where this case goes, if it actually would result in this guy being convicted of driving without insurance, because it's not considered an exception to being a vehicle, so it is defined as a vehicle. But unfortunately, this type of vehicle would not be able to be insured under an automobile policy, not in Ontario. No insurance company would insure this under an automobile insurance policy. And the same thing would go with BC. This would not be insurable under an automobile insurance policy. So once again, we're talking about a situation where legislation is not keeping up with the times at this point. Somebody in the BC legislature is going to have to address this in their Motor Vehicle Act and make the decision whether these types of vehicles, whether this types of device, this one wheel, is an exception or not. If it is an exception, then it's not supposed to be on the road. So that's one thing that this individual in the article could have helped themselves by not operating this thing on the road. Once this thing once he started operating on the road, he put himself in that situation. But the issue is, like I said, I don't think I actually said where in BC this, maybe it did and I just missed it, but it didn't say where in BC this occurred. There might be a bylaw in that particular city or town that prevents you from operating this type of device on a sidewalk. So keep up to date with the bylaws and laws in your particular town or city. If you're looking to buy this type of vehicle, an e-scooter, an e-bike that has no pedals, because it may not be allowed to be utilized in that particular city. For instance, in Toronto, e-scooters are not allowed in Toronto, but you see them all the time because that rule doesn't get enforced enough. So, but they are in, that ban does not exist in the jurisdictions around Toronto. So, like I said, if you're looking to purchase one of these items, make sure you're keeping up to date with the local bylaws in your town, and also speak to your broker or agent to see if your habitational policy, the personal liability, excludes liability arising from the use or operation or ownership of these types of vehicles, because some do. So you want to make sure, because you won't have any coverage under your automobile policy, you may or may not have coverage under your habitational policy, your homeowners, tenants, or condo unit owners policy. So before you buy this for yourself or buy this for somebody else, get educated and make sure you have proper liability coverage, because these types of vehicles can cause some damage, can cause some injuries to third parties, and you don't want to be stuck holding the ball and having to deal with the lawsuit yourself. So make sure you get educated. So that is it for me for today. Thank you so much for joining me. If you like what I do here, please like this video. Please leave a comment down in the comments section. Please subscribe. Please share this video with others you think might find this interesting. Reminder to follow Insurance in Canada on Twitter/X. And also, as I said before, these videos will be available in audio podcast on Spotify. So if you rather do this audio podcast, make sure you check out Spotify. And until next time, bye-bye.